5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
One of the most common sticking points for many people when they think about the Catholic Church is her claim to infallibility. But to paraphrase Inigo Montoyo, infallibility doesn't always mean what you think it means. So what does infallibility mean, and what does it matter? That's what we're going to be talking about today on Ignition. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Dr. Chris Bergwald, and we want to set your faith ablaze so that you might live the adventure that comes from a relationship with Jesus Christ. And we've got a blazing fire today, actually, thanks to our producer extraordinaire, Bill Seeley. Before we get into the topic of infallibility, though, we want you to know that, as always, we love to hear from our listeners. So if you've got questions about this topic or any topic, if you've got an idea for a future episode, topic that you want to hear about, please contact us. The easiest way to do so is by email, and the address is ignition@sfcatholic.org. Again, ignition@sfcatholic.org. I am still joined by my co-host. It's the new year. I was hoping for new year.
No one volunteered.
No one volunteered.
I have to ask you. Okay, so
I hear you tell some people things, though.
I do sometimes. Yes. We had our Catholic Views Christmas special recently, and I gave out your Ignition email a couple of times in case there were complaints or
no complaints.
No,
nothing.
No? Oh, good.
Nothing.
Or no one watched.
I
know people watched.
I'll leave you to decide.
No, people watched.
So the in case you're listening, the voice you're hearing is my now. I'm not long time,
regular?
But we're getting there. Regular co-host Renae Kranz. How you doing, Renae?
Good. I'm doing good.
We're recording here now in the new year, so it's official. Because we recorded some episodes early, so we were like, but Happy New Year!
Thank you.
But as people are listening to this show, it is. Do you know what it is? Well, of course.
I do because we cheated and looked the other day.
Oh boy. Yes.
It's the baptism of the Lord this weekend.
Yes, this weekend. Yes. And therefore, if they're listening like the day after, so if they're listening on radio, they're going to hear this the day after, Monday, which is...
It's an ordinary time now.
It's ordinary time.
I just don't know. It's a day in ordinary time.
It's Monday of the first week of ordinary time, if it's a Monday when folks are listening to this. So, ordinary time.
Back to green.
Or brown when you look outside here in South Dakota with barely any white stuff.
Oh, not outsidiness.
I know. Outsidiness. That's a technical word that you use in journalism school. Outsidiness. So, all right. Enough.
It's a Renaeism.
Enough inane, silly banter, Renae. Infallibility.
Yes. This is a good one. I like it.
Thank you. I know you like every episode of Ignition that we do together. I was thinking about, there's some specific reasons why I'm going to be teaching on this in one of our parishes. So it got me thinking about this just as a topic. And just to start with, I want to talk a little bit about the importance of infallibility. And I was going to start just talking, but I've got you here to ask questions
to torture and make look stupid.
But I'm not going to, sometimes I'll let you, I'll let the rope go for a long time before.
Right.
I won't give you too much rope to do anything
to hang
with.
myself by.
You said it, not me. Why is infallibility important?
In my mind and what I understand is, if you don't have an assurance that what the church teaches is true, how can you know it's true? I mean, how can you trust it? How can you rely on it to be the right thing to pay attention to believe in?
Okay.
So infallibility, to me, that's why it's important, because otherwise, how can you trust it for sure? Otherwise, it might just be some guy's opinion.
Okay. That's a great, and actually, that's very similar to what I was going to say, and we're going to unpack that. So in light of that, then, to be clearer, infallibility may not mean what people think it means.
Right.
So what does it mean? What is infallibility? What isn't infallibility?
Are you referring to infallibility of the Pope specifically, or of the church, or?
You can answer however you'd like to. You can make the necessary distinctions.
Well, okay.
This time.
So the magisterial teaching of the church is infallible because it has to be. I mean, something has to be.
So what does infallibility mean?
What does it mean? It means it's the truth and you can depend on that.
Okay. Yeah.
way of-
That's okay. To be a bit more precise,
Thank you,
there's
please.
no error.
Right,
So
okay.
infallible means not fallible. Fallible means false.
Right.
Or some falsity to it.
Right.
So infallible means no error.
Okay.
Okay, so you made a good distinction, infallibility of the church, so the church's teachings.
Mm-hmm.
But we do talk about the infallibility of the Pope. So I'm glad we're getting all the cards on the table, and then we'll kind of look at these cards a bit more
Right.
closely to mix metaphors.
Yeah.
Because I always look at my playing cards very closely.
Very closely.
Yes.
Yeah.
So infallibility of the Pope. What's the difference between the infallibility of the Pope and the infallibility of the church and her teachings
Right.
in general?
I think there's a huge confusion about what we mean by when the Pope is infallible. I think a lot of people, especially outside of the church, think that means everything the Pope says or does must be right and we must follow it. And that's not what it means at all. What infallibility, he has to speak from the chair of Peter. He has to basically invoke that, and there's certain ways he has to do that. And it has to be on matters of doctrine and dogma, I
Faith
believe.
and morals.
Faith and morals. Okay, so that wasn't exactly true, right? But yeah, faith
Close.
and morals.
Yep.
So it's not just like some opinion, because popes have opinions.
Yeah, absolutely.
And sometimes they aren't actually fully
True.
True.
Their opinions can be true, but just because you're the Pope doesn't, and we'll get into this more.
Yes.
But just because you're Pope doesn't mean that every one of your opinions is true.
Right. So I don't know if that was
great. So, and I think some even more, and I don't, maybe not as much as it used to be the case, but there have been times when people, including Catholics, misunderstood infallibility to mean that when the church says about the Pope, that the Pope is infallible, that he's perfect, that he's without sin.
Yeah, that's another one.
That's definitely not
No.
the case.
Well, I think they confuse impeccable with infallible.
Correct. So impeccable, right? Impeccable means without flaw.
Right.
So it's a matter of no flaw whatsoever, and every pope would definitely say that ain't me.
No.
They all acknowledge that they're sinners. They go into confession like other Catholics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So infallibility, first of all, is not the same thing as impeccability. But then, you make a really good distinction. Infallibility, specifically of the Pope, does not mean, as we were just saying, that every one of his opinions are true.
Right.
So we'll get into that a little bit more. So that's the basics of what it is, and we already talked about why it matters. And I guess I want to go back to that why it matters a little bit as well. So at the end of Matthew's Gospel, Renae, you've heard me and others, I'm sure, talk about the Great Commission before. So I'm glad you're nodding.
We have it around the top of our at
Yes,
Holy
you
Spirit
do.
Parish.
Your
We have
parish,
it
right.
written around the top of the ceiling, right at the
Yeah.
base of at the top of the walls, the base of the ceiling.
So what is the Great Commission? Roughly.
It's basically Jesus sending his apostles out to make disciples of all nations.
Right, exactly. So
Baptize and make disciples of all nations.
exactly. So it's Matthew 28 verses 18 and following. So the apostles come to, it's the very end of Matthew's Gospel. The apostles come to Jesus. This is after the resurrection. And he says to them, all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. So all authority has been given to me. And then he says, go therefore. So I've been given authority, and now implicitly here, I'm entrusting responsibility to you. To some degree, I'm giving you a share in my authority. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, as you already said, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always until the end of the age. So this is Jesus, and that's how Matthew's Gospel ends. Matthew has no account of the ascension.
Yeah.
He doesn't have an account of Jesus rising up to the heavens. So this is how Matthew ends his gospel, with Jesus giving this commission, this charge, this responsibility, this command to the men that he had chosen and formed over the course of 2-3 years during his public ministry. And they are now the ones who he's given this authority to. Again, go make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, lo, I am with you always until the end of the age. So, Jesus has entrusted the responsibility of spreading the gospel, his gospel, the gospel of Jesus Christ, to these men. These are teachings, teaching them to observe all that I've commanded you. So hand on to everybody that what I taught you, teach them what I taught you. These teachings, do these teachings matter?
I
Why?
should think so.
Why? We've talked about this a lot.
Because Jesus said so.
Well, yeah, and you always lead with, because he said so.
Because he said
yes,
so.
But why
is that not enough for us?
No, because he wants us to understand why.
I know.
So why are these teachings important?
Because they help us live a holy life.
Holy life and get to heaven, which is one and the same thing.
Yeah.
The holier the life. So
quicker you get there.
Exactly.
I guess.
So these are teachings that matter. And he told the apostles to hand them on. Let's talk about the apostles then. These are the men. So these 11 men, because Judas was one of the 12, but he's not in the picture anymore. Jesus tells these apostles to hand on these life-changing, transformative teachings to all people, to make disciples, to baptize them and to teach them, to make them followers of his. The apostles are supposed to do this. They're supposed to teach Jesus's teachings. Let's talk about these men there. What do we know about the apostles as it relates to the responsibility they now have given by Jesus to teach the good news of him, of Jesus Christ?
We know that they're human just like us.
And therefore that means...
they make mistakes and screw up and do silly things.
Yep. So they're not impeccable.
Nope.
They make mistakes.
They even sometimes do really bad things.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So Peter denied Jesus 3 times. Later, after Jesus has given this authority to them, after the Holy Spirit has descended upon them at Pentecost, Peter still makes mistakes. There's a time when he's sort of acting as if he's with the people who say the Gentile believers still need to be baptized, and Paul calls them out. We read about that in Galatians 2, where Paul writes to the Galatians about how he had to challenge even Cephas, because basically Peter was being a little bit hypocritical. Cephas is the Aramaic name for Peter, where he was being a little bit hypocritical.
Right.
So Peter, again, was not sinless before or after Jesus gave this authority to him and the other apostles. Right. They still make mistakes. So why do we trust them with these? Why does Jesus entrust his teachings to them?
Because the Holy Spirit is with them.
Lo, I am with you until the close of the age. And Jesus says, I will, in John's gospel in particular, Jesus emphasizes that he is going to send the Holy Spirit to lead them into all truth.
Right.
Okay, so we've got these 11 men that Jesus has entrusted with this responsibility. He's given this authority to them to hand on his teachings to make disciples of other men. And how are they going to do that? By the power of the Holy Spirit. So we'll talk more about that in just a minute. But if you're just tuning in, you're listening to Ignition. I'm your host, Dr. Chris Bergwell, talking today with Renae Kranz about what infallibility is, what it isn't, and why it matters. Okay, so Jesus gave at the end of his time on earth, he gave his authority to the apostles to teach these life-changing, heaven-going to
salvation.
These teachings. That was
I don't know what just happened.
Eloquent.
Are you having a stroke?
Yes, maybe. I was thinking life-changing teachings. Life-changing, heaven-allowing? No, don't. Yeah. He trusted to sinful men, to sinners.
They are the only kind of men, after all.
They are the only. Was that
men and women? Men as a human race.
Okay, thank
I'm not saying men.
Because Bill and I took it, male, just male men.
No,
you mean
I'm talking
all
men
humanity.
as in humans. Yes.
Okay. Thanks for just not being.
I really didn't know I needed to explain that to you, but being kind of sensitive.
Thought you were making
me
certain claims about the fairer sex. All right. And this is going to happen by the power of the Holy Spirit. So what we read then throughout, and I wanted to focus on Matthew 28, but throughout the New Testament, we see time and time again, Jesus talking about the Holy Spirit will ensure that the church teaches without error. Back in Matthew 16, Jesus talks about Peter in particular, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. And that's always been understood to mean, among other things, that there will be no error taught by Jesus' church. Paul in 1 Timothy chapter 3 verse 15 describes the church, the pillar, the church, the household of God as the pillar and bulwark of truth. The pillar and bulwark of truth. In other places throughout the New Testament, we see Paul, Peter, and others talking about how to receive from them what they passed on to others. So implicit within that is this reality. And Paul talks all the time, I'm giving you the gospel of Jesus Christ. So it's the pure, authentic gospel which is passed on from Jesus first to his apostles, but then from the apostles to other men, to their spiritual successors, not their earthly successors, not their literal children, because many of them, most of them, eventually they wouldn't have children. They weren't marrying. But the spiritual role of an apostolic successor, aka a bishop. So what's important to know, going back to Jesus, though, he taught his apostles, and he commended them to teach others. And some of them did come to write down what we now call the New Testament, and so together with the Old Testament, we do have the Bible. But the command was to teach.
Not to write down.
Not to write down. Both verb, and they did that. They did do it in writing, but they also did it verbally. So from the very beginning, then, what we see is basically the hierarchy of the church, or that you talked about. I think you used the word early on, the Magisterium, Latin word, the teaching office. The teaching office of the church, that is the Pope and the bishops in union with him, whose responsibility is to perpetuate what Jesus told the apostles. Make disciples of all nations, baptizing them and teaching them everything that I taught the apostles.
So the magisterium is not like some committee. That is set aside of certain bishops or certain people. It's all of the bishops around the world in communion with the Pope.
In communion with the Pope.
Who is a bishop?
Who is a bishop? What's his diocese?
Rome.
The Diocese of Rome. The Pope becomes Pope. So that's another conversation.
So there's not. I think that's a confusion too. Is like they think some magisterium is just this committee of guys. Well, it is a committee of guys,
a big darn committee.
But it includes all of them. It's not like just a piece.
No, exactly. So all the bishops, together with the Pope, as you said, who is a bishop, they constitute the magisterium, and their job is to teach the truth of Jesus Christ. So the bottom line, and then we're going to get to infallibility in particular, but everything the church teaches. So I've got the Bible here, and I've got the catechism here. Everything the church teaches is true. Why? Because of the power of the Holy Spirit, not because of the brilliance of the church's earthly leaders, the bishops, but because of the power of the Holy Spirit. Not because of the holiness of the church's leaders, because not all of them have always been, but because of the power of the Holy Spirit. So everything we believe is. So I have certitude that everything the Catholic Church teaches is true. So there is no error in everything the church teaches. However, infallible has another level of importance. So everything the church teaches is without error. So what does it mean? Now I want to focus then on the church's teachings as infallible. It does mean minimally that there's no error in. So that's why we have confidence. That's why we have certainty in what the church teaches. But sometimes we talk about certain teachings being infallibly defined or infallibly declared. So I just want to talk a little bit about what that means. But again, I want to actually, I'm going to preface it by talking about what it doesn't mean. We as Catholics are not obliged to, or we don't say, well, I only believe the truths that have been infallibly defined because the other ones, maybe they're fallible. No. All the teachings are true. some have been infallibly defined or declared, but all of the teachings are true. So we accept them all, recognizing that some of them have this extra stamp of approval for a variety of reasons, and that they're defined as infallible.
Right.
Okay. So let's talk about a little bit about what that. So, Renae, what does that mean? Do you know?
Well, I don't know if I know what it means. I know that a lot of times they're declared or defined as infallible because there's some question or something has risen up through another group or whatever that goes against it or teaches something against it.
Right.
I know that's a lot of the reason why that happens a lot of the time, but I don't know if I can define it.
Yeah. So
better.
if we look at the history of the church, what we see time and time again is, especially around when the councils are called, not all of the councils, but many of the councils in the church. So by council, what do I mean, Renae?
A gathering of bishops?
Yeah,
I
an
guess?
ecumenical council is a gathering of all the bishops of the world together with the Pope, and not always in Rome. The last two have been held, actually the last few have been held in Rome, but only two have been held at the Vatican, Vatican I and Vatican II. So they're gathered together, and usually in the history of the church, again, most of these councils have been called to respond to some great challenge of the faith, usually some great heresy, some false teaching that is spreading throughout the church. So the first ecumenical council was held in 325 in modern-day Turkey. Nicaea was the ancient name. So modern-day Turkey, the first council of Nicaea, the year 325, was called because of the Arian heresy. So the Arian heresy, by the way...
That had to do with whether or not God was... Jesus was God. Yeah.
Yeah, and who was the founder of the Arian heresy?
Some dude named Arian.
Arius.
Arius
was the. Any guesses? But there was another early church heresy, the Nestorian heresy. You want to guess who the founder?
Well, I can't say his name. Please don't make me.
Nestorius.
Basically what you just said. I just can't say it.
Yeah. So Arius, who was a bishop, priest, and then bishop. And he wasn't like an evil mad scientist, but I say this all the time. But he had this idea, but then he became obstinate. He became pretty stubborn in holding to his idea that Jesus was the greatest of God's creatures, but he was just a creature.
Right.
And so the bishops of the church gather in modern day Turkey in ancient Nicaea, and the Pope sent some delegates on his behalf to speak in his name to this council, and they defined no, Arius.
No.
Story. We'll get to that story in a minute. No, Jesus is actually God. And so we have the Nicene Creed. God from God, light from light, true God from true God. Begotten, not made, consubstantial with the Father. Okay? So you have the bishops gather together and they make a solemn declaration about Jesus.
Right.
That is an infallible statement.
Okay.
So there are times when, especially at ecumenical councils, but sometimes, two times in particular, popes have made solemn declarations where they're formally teaching on a matter of faith and morals. This is true. They're both about, actually, the two most easiest examples of popes speaking infallibly are about Mary.
Yeah,
that she was conceived without sin, the Immaculate Conception, and that she was assumed into heaven. So those were infallible declarations made by popes. Other infallible declarations have been made by ecumenical councils, like Nicaea.
Right.
So, quick, brief story. We just got a few minutes left, but we have to share, especially because we're so close to Christmas still. Let's share
lovely
this.
St. Nicholas.
Yes, our lovely St. Nicholas. So, I've
heard this is untrue, though.
Well, it's probably, but it's a great legend.
It's a great story.
Nicholas was a bishop.
Yeah.
Nicholas lived during the time of the First Council of Nicaea, 325. He was a bishop actually in Turkey, modern day Turkey. So the legend is he probably would have. He could have easily been at the Council of Nicaea. All the bishops should have been there. But the legend is that in the debates, because it's true that sometimes ecumenical councils would get pretty heated.
Oh, sure.
I mean, we talk about committees and bishops today. They do tend, even when they strongly disagree, you actually, at least never publicly, you don't see them like getting really like
Right.
whatever.
Yeah. There's no slapping.
But the story is at the First Council of Nicaea, good Bishop Nicholas, Saint Nicholas, Santa Claus, slapped or even punched Arius in the face.
He said, no.
He said, "You've been not nice, but naughty." And
You get a punch instead of coal.
Exactly. So did that really happen? Maybe not. But that's in keeping with the pretty vigorous disagreements that would arise at ecumenical councils.
Seeing as how we have no eyewitnesses, we don't know.
No eyewitness accounts. Yeah. So ecumenical councils and particular ex cathedra from the chair, so formal pronouncements of the popes, vary, like not just even when he's teaching in a document like an encyclical, but when it's like he's like, I'm speaking now
like he has to say that
authoritatively in my role as Bishop of Rome, the See of Peter. On this matter of faith and morals, this is true.
Right.
And then it becomes an ex cathedra, an infallible statement.
When he's flying around in his airplane and he just says something to the press, that is not an infallible
So Pope
statement.
Francis or other, right, yeah, that's not. Now, could a pope make an infallible statement flying around an airplane? Yes, but he'd have to make clear that that's what he's doing.
Yes.
And Pope Francis, Benedict XVI,
They've
John Paul
not
II,
done that.
Paul VI, when they're flying around airplanes, never did that. No other popes flew around airplanes as far as I know. So that's just there's a lot more we could say about infallibility, but to kind of go back, these are important teachings. They're life-changing teachings.
Yeah.
Jesus wanted to ensure that we always have access to these teachings throughout history. So he gave the power of the Holy Spirit to the church in general to ensure that the teachings of Jesus Christ would remain held and guarded and taught consistently and constantly throughout history.
Yeah. Good. There's more I could bring up about that, but obviously we don't have time.
Well, we have 10 seconds, so
it'll take more than that.
No more than 10 seconds. Okay, all right. So, Renae, thanks again for being here on this episode of Ignition. And again, folks, if you have questions about infallibility, if you want to hear more about infallibility, or if you have ideas for future episodes of Ignition, please contact us, ignition@sfcatholic.org. And until next time, may God bless you.